Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. I hope this show is something that you'll look forward to checking in with every week. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Gardening Utah aims to inspire you and keep you in the know of what tasks you should be accomplishing in your yard and meet amazing, informative experts along the way. This show airs on the radio on the weekends here in Utah at 10 a.m. on 860 AM KKAT, and episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. On today's show, I'm so excited to have Brian Lloyd from Olson's Greenhouse with us today, and it's so fitting because, Olson's Greenhouse supplies so many of the bedding plants to us here in the state of Utah. If you have shopped at Walmart for bedding plants or Home Depot, or in some cases Costco for beautiful, beautiful petunias, geraniums, pansies, you name it, it's very likely they were grown at Olson's Greenhouse right here in the great state of Utah. You can check it out at ogg.com where they grow all of their plants. But today, we are going to be discussing container planting. So we've never really dove into that topic on this show, so I'm really, really excited because the thing is this. It doesn't matter if you are brand new to gardening or you have a huge yard or a tiny yard or just maybe no yard at all and you've got an apartment balcony. You can grow plants in containers, anything from herbs, perennials, annuals, you name it. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty today, everything from what kind of containers you need, the soil, the watering, the plants, and how to design them to look absolutely fantastic. So we're going to be getting into all of that today with Brian Lloyd from Olson's Greenhouse. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is, it is May and it is time to mulch. May is the perfect time to mulch your garden. And now listen, I could probably do an entire show on when to mulch, the benefits of mulch, why to mulch. But let's just say, consider this your inspo to get out there and get some mulch down on the ground. And timing is really everything when it comes to mulch. Doing it too early in the season can kind of prevent the soil from warming up from the freezing temperatures that it experienced all winter. But in general, mid to late spring is mulching season, and it's the perfect time to get out there and get it done. Now, one of the obvious benefits of mulching is the ability to reduce the amount of water that evaporates from your soil, and that greatly reduces your need to water plants. So really, it is great for water retention and just overall water saving. It also improves the quality of your soil. It breaks up clay and it allows better air and water movement through the soil, and it does provide nutrients as well to sandy soil and improves sandy soil's ability to hold water. Mulch also acts as an insulating layer on top of that soil, and it keeps the soil cooler in the summer, and the roots of your plants like that. Now, why do gardeners love mulch? Well, all of those reasons I just mentioned, but also because mulch really helps keep those weeds down. Any weed seed that is on top of your soil is not going to germinate, and the weeds that do grow are much easier to pull out, and gardeners like that. Now, before you put down your mulch, make sure to weed before you do it and then water thoroughly, and this will help you get the most benefit from the mulch. Also, make sure when you do put down your mulch, keep that mulch about 6 to 12 inches away from the base of any trees and shrubs. Now, how much mulch to put down? You're going to want to do about 2 to 4 inches of mulch in all of your planting areas. If you have a really fine mulch that's maybe like a half an inch or smaller, it should be applied no more than about 2 inches deep. But if you have a really coarse mulch like bark chips, those can be applied up to 4 inches deep. Now you may be wondering, well, what type of mulch should you buy? Well, there's really two kinds of mulch. There is organic mulch and inorganic mulch. So an organic mulch is something like chopped leaves, straw, grass clippings, compost, wood chips, shredded bark, pine needles, sawdust, and in some cases even paper. Inorganic mulches are things like black plastic, landscape fabrics, which I'm not a fan of either. Another type of mulch that you will see is maybe small rock or pea gravel. I'm not a massive fan of that because it does really heat up the plants around you, especially trees. A lot of times you will see the base, the bottom of maybe an evergreen tree that are burned, and that is partially because the rocks are absorbing heat during the day, and all the mulches for that matter. But at night, the rocks are continuing to emanate that heat, and so it really doesn't get that chance to cool down, and it can in some cases damage plants and evergreens and perennials and shrubs. So you kind of want to be careful of that and what kind of mulch you put where. A lot of it is preference. I personally really love to use compost mulch because of the obvious benefits with regard to everything I said earlier and improving the soil, but it also creates a beautiful uniform look to the planting bed, which I love. Either way, no matter what kind of mulch you choose, get out there, get that mulch down, and you will spend so much less time this year watering and weeding. And that is my tip of the week.
And that's your Gardening Utah Tip of the Week, brought to you by The Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
And you know what? Do what I say, not what I do. If you would come over to my house right now, you would see that I have not yet mulched my beds, but you know, it's the perfect weekend to do it. I'm hoping to get around to it. Place a big order. I've got a half an acre that I've got to get mulched. Well, not the whole thing, obviously. So I've got some lawn and some, hardscape and things, but I have quite a bit of area to cover. But I mulched last year, did not regret it one bit. I did a pretty thick layer last year, and it really saved a lot of my watering as well as a lot of weeds. So I've got quite the project coming up, and I'm hoping to get my mulch ordered and delivered and get it down and get everything in the ground. I cannot wait. I'm waiting a little bit. I know this is that famous weekend we all wait for because those of us, I would say, in the greater Salt Lake area where they say, oh, after Mother's Day, it's safe to plant. Well, really is kind of a misnomer. Really completely depends on whatever microclimate you're in, as I talked with Cameron about last week, all those microclimates. But I'm personally, with my area, I'm waiting until next Wednesday, partially because Liz Hamilton told me to. And I do everything that Liz says to do, as well as it does look like Sunday's going to get a little cold. So anyway, but I've got my peppers and my tomatoes pretty much ready to go that I started from seed. So I cannot wait to get those in the ground. Quick reminder, go to 860kkat.com. and hit the contest button to enter to win a raised garden box from Q&R Box Gardens. It's a $400 value. It's a 4x8 raised garden box delivered. Unbelievable. So make sure to check out that contest. And we are going to be right back after this with Brian Lloyd from Olson's Greenhouse talking container plants, how to plant the perfect ones for this year. Stay with us right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is Brian Lloyd with Olson's Greenhouse. Brian, thanks for being here.
Hey, Jana. It's so great to be back with you. Did you know it's been like a year since I was on last?
I know. I can't believe it's been a full year, but I'm so happy to have you back. And I have a funny story to tell you. So from your last episode that you were on, you talked to me and the listeners about how you fill a lot of the plants at Costco. So a lot of those are grown here at Olson's Greenhouse in Utah. And the other day, So I've always gone to Costco for my yearly Mandevilla vine because I like to have one under my porch.
Right.
So I like to have one under my porch, but they just don't, they obviously don't last the winter. It didn't overwinter the way I wanted, but I tried. Anyway, I was at Costco and just plants were going out like crazy. Every single cart was in line filled with the most beautiful petunias and geraniums and all the things. And I see the sticker on the side that says property of Olson's greenhouse. One of the, the racks that had all the plants on it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so I got super excited. I was like, I know, anyway, it was pretty fun.
It's really interesting. We actually, all the bedding plants at Home Depot and Walmart come from us. We have an exclusive contract. In the state of Utah, we have an exclusive contract at Olson's Greenhouse to supply all their annuals and perennials. But at Costco, it's a little bit different. They buy from several different suppliers. So if you want to make sure you're getting Olson's Greenhouse plants at Costco, you kind of have to look at the tag, the UPC number. And that's the only place that we can say that it's grown by Olson's Greenhouse, or you can see that they're on our rack as well. Yeah. We label our racks with our name, but the product gets moved around on racks. So to be sure, go look at that little UPC. And if it says grown by Olson's Greenhouse, you're getting good stuff.
Absolutely. So on that tag, how do you tell on the UPC? Does it say Olson's Greenhouse on that?
It does. Yes. Oh. It's actually a Department of Ag requirement. So the Department of Ag launched several measures probably 20 years ago that said you've got to put certain information. You've got to either say grown by or grown for. And so we choose grown by because we can sell our stuff to several different places. But you've got to kind of say where it was grown, what state it was grown in, and who it was grown by. And so we put our name on there. Even though most plants are generic and sometimes there's a brand name, we grow for several brands as well, like Proven Winners. And we sell several different, we're licensed to sell several different brands of plants, but we can't put our own brand name on in many cases. So we don't really say, you can't really say there's an Olson's Greenhouse plant without looking really closely at that UPC level.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a really good tip. And the other good point to know is that if you're wondering, okay, how do I go visit Olson's Greenhouse? It's not open to the public, right?
It's not. No, unfortunately, we're large enough and busy enough and our aisles are so narrow, and we've got carts going this direction and that, and especially this time of year, right before Mother's Day is our busiest week, and we're shipping, I think, probably about 90 semi-loads per day out of our facilities. So it's extremely busy, but it's a sight to behold. I wish we could set up a way to do tours maybe one day in the future, but for now we're not open to the public, unfortunately.
Or maybe a webcam.
Yeah. I've thought about that. That'd be awesome to watch your crop grow.
Totally.
From the seed.
Yeah, or watch it all get loaded into the trucks, or maybe like a time lapse or something like that.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Okay, well, speaking of Mother's Day weekend, the fun thing about having you on the show this time of year, it hit me today because we talked about this a little bit before the show, is that in many parts of Utah, not all, but many, this is that beholden weekend that we all of us gardeners wait for, because it's kind of the weekend where it's most often, quote, in the clear to get out there and plant your containers and plant your annuals and your vegetables in the garden, but not all over. But it's just fun to kind of have you on the Mother's Day weekend show that, it's kind of like we see the light at the end of the tunnel and we can start planting in most areas. Right.
And most varieties,
Yeah,
you're definitely right. But that's kind of, I like to say this all the time, that's kind of an old wives' tale that you can't plant until Mother's Day, because there's actually a lot of varieties too that you can plant much earlier than Mother's Day. I start gardening in March every year, and I do it in two ways. I use the right varieties that will take some frost, but I also love to garden with containers early on because they're easier to protect. And if we do get a really cold snap, whether it's before or after Mother's Day, we've gotten hard frosts in May before. If you're going to get that cold snap, most containers you can easily take indoors or into a garage to protect them for the night.
Absolutely. That's so true. And that's what we're going to talk about today is container plants. And I'm just excited about it because it's something we've never really dug deep into here on Gardening Utah. So I just think you're the perfect person to have a chat with about it. So,
well, it's my favorite topic, so I can't wait. It's going to be exciting. Yep.
So I think maybe you just answered the question before me even asking, why is it your favorite topic? Is it because you can kind of cheat time and get things growing earlier?
I think that's a big part of it. But for me, I love things that new gardeners can figure out easily. And there's just a few basics you need to know about containers, and you'll be set up for success. It's a little easier. It's actually a lot easier, in my opinion, than getting a bedding plant, a flower bed ready for plants. And it's a little bit easier and a little bit more forgiving than other things. Now, there are some things that are difficult about it, but once you know a few tips, you're set up for success the whole season long. And so that's the main reason I like that it gives new gardeners a chance to get into the hobby in a small way, but have big results.
That is such a good point. New gardeners, I love that. In addition to anybody who really doesn't have a lot of space, you can have a balcony garden. I love that. I've never
in your parents' home. You can rent, and you don't have to worry about installing a nice flower bed. Yeah. It works for everybody. Or you might own your home on 3 acres and put containers throughout the landscape as well as on a patio area and enjoy them all summer long. Whether you're sitting out in the patio or I decorate hanging baskets and planters throughout my flower beds in the front yard as well, just for the curb appeal. So there's a lot of different reasons for container gardening.
I bet your yard is so gorgeous.
It is. I bring a lot of plants home.
I was going to say.
And my wife and kids plant them all for me. They kind of get sick of it, but they love it too. And we do have a lot of flowers. I mean, we've got a beautiful landscape. We've been blessed with a half acre that we get to decorate, but it's all about the flowers for sure. And we've got several hanging basket stands that are permanently installed, cemented into the ground. And then we doll up the flower beds as well in the front and the back. So there's a lot of flowers for sure.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's start with the foundation of container gardening. It's obviously going to start with the container itself. Do you have a favorite? Because a question I have gotten before is, do I want to steer away from terracotta? Because, the perception is that perhaps you have to water it more. Is there a perfect container pot to start with? I
think so, but it doesn't have to do with material in this case. Because first of all, in the last 10 years, there's been some major advancements in the materials that are used for containers. There's a lot of faux concrete, faux ceramic, they're using fiberglass to get the weight down, but making it look just like an old world Vietnamese or Italian planter or even terracotta can be produced without any clay nowadays. And so you can get almost any look you want and get it lightweight and durable. And so material is subjective, and you need to find something that matches your yard. What I like with containers is big. And I put a lot of small containers in, but big is more forgiving. More soil volume is the key for me. And no matter what you're doing, the more soil volume you have, the more success you're going to have. Whether you're an experienced gardener or a novice, if you go on vacation and you ask the neighbor kid to water your containers and he misses a day or she forgets for a few days, that gives you that cushion if you got a lot of soil volume that you're not going to kill everything necessarily, depending on how hot it is, right? Yeah. So it's size for me.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. I love that. And you're exactly right. They just retain a lot more water, and the plants seem to do better because the roots can spread out so much more, and you just get such a beautiful splash of color. Okay. So we've got the container down. Now, a lot of people think, now what kind of potting soil do I put in my plants? And that's really a misnomer. There is no such thing really. Well, at least what we're mostly putting in containers, we're not putting in soil at all, are we?
Exactly. Soil is, it's really just, it's sand, silt, or clay particles. And we don't want any of those in a container. What we want in a container is great drainage. And we need a few other attributes like air porosity. Plants actually need oxygen to breathe. Most people don't realize that. It's got to be able to hold water and retain water but also have good drainage so the excess water can get out. So those are the main characteristics that we need. What we need is what most people call a potting mix. And there's a lot of different suppliers out there. Most are based off peat moss. Some are based off coconut coir. There's several different bases for it, but the key is those main attributes of good drainage, holding water and nutrients as well, and also allowing air to get to the roots.
Yeah. Okay. And do you have a favorite?
I do. Not necessarily by brand, because there's a couple of people making it, but Scott's Miracle Grow was the first to come out with moisture control. And moisture control has little polymers that actually absorb water, and they'll expand to like 10 or 20 or 30 times their own size just with water. And then they'll slowly release that water over time. And they'll keep doing this over and over and over again. So I love that fact. Anytime you've got anything that says something about moisture control or moisture holding potting mix, you've got those polymers in it that will, and they're a buffer for both ways. They can be a buffer for underwatering because they'll hold that extra water, or overwatering because they'll get the extra water away from the roots if you overwater.
Got it. I love that. I'm glad that that's what I bought for this year. So I feel like I'm in good shape.
And it's expensive, so I usually mix it. I'll find a cheaper potting mix, or sometimes I'll reuse a little bit of last year's. And other times but I always mix in a little bit of that, especially into the top 6 to 8 inches of my containers. I'll utilize moisture control type potting mix.
Got it. We'll be right back with more from Brian Lloyd in Olson's Greenhouse on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jenna Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and I've got Brian Lloyd with Olson's Greenhouse with me, and we are talking container plants. And before this last break, we were talking a little bit about what to put in your container plant and Brian's favorite potting mix to put inside. And I've got another question for you. You get a lot of the questions, especially when you're looking at large containers. Can you put anything in the bottom as a filler? And there's a couple different theories. Give me your thoughts. Do you fill it with all the same medium through the whole pot?
I do. And this is actually, there are a lot of theories about putting crushed up containers in, putting things upside down. And I've done it before. Putting logs in or gravel in or anything like that. And the problem you get is if you don't have the same thing throughout, you'll end up with different types of microenvironments, especially when it comes to how it holds the water. And what the biggest thing is, the biggest problem is, if it holds water in a certain way, you're going to get root rot. So even if you put gravel in there, the water is going to move through at a different rate than it moves through the potting mix that's right above it. And it's just not a good thing to have. So, potting mix is, in most cases, it's not really that much more expensive than the other things that people try to put in to fill that volume up with. What I like to do, if you've got a really huge container that you don't want to buy a yard of potting mix for one container, or if it's a really deep one, a tall, narrow, upright container, what I'll do is I'll try and find a different plastic pot that actually fits inside of that. We call it an insert in the industry. And so we'll insert, the container, the real container. What you're growing it in is maybe like a 10-inch round plastic pot that you can find everywhere. And you're trying to find one that actually fits, and the lip of it maybe holds it into your decorative container. Does that make sense? And so it's just draining into the decorative container, but there's not a bunch of stuff to impede the water movement throughout.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And the roots aren't going all around. They're just like a normal growing mix. That I've seen that technique used for indoor plants quite often. It never occurred to me to do it outside. That's genius.
Yeah, of course. And it doesn't have to be the exact same size. It could be You can put a round container into a square decorative container. As long as you've got spillers, anything trailing over the side to cover that, that transition area up, you can do a lot of different sizes and shapes as your insert pot.
Yes. Okay. I love that. That's such a good point. And you do see these little myths that go around online that, fill the bottom 5 inches of all your pots with styrofoam. And I just think to myself,
no, don't do it.
Please don't. Yeah, because the roots are not good for the plants at all.
No, none of those are great options. And they don't really end up saving too much money either.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, now last year's potting soil. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
When you're, starting to get your containers going again, what's your tip around utilizing last year's potting mix?
Well, I probably reuse potting mix more than I recommend people do it, because I understand what's going on there. And potting mix, because it's based on peat moss, which is organic, but the actual physical properties don't break down very quickly. And so you can get a few years out of a potting mix without the physical attributes of air holding capacity and those types of things deteriorating on you. What you do lose is fertilizer. And almost every potting mix out there has some sort of slow release, time release fertilizer mixed into it. And those only last between 3 months and sometimes 6 months. But usually in containers, it's around 3 months, often even less than that. And so as long as you're going to resupply those nutrients to the container, then you can reuse the mix. So that's number one thing you've got to consider is how are you going to get nutrients to your plants? And the second thing to consider is disease. And there are a lot of fungal diseases and funguses and viruses that can overwinter and live and remain in your mix. And so if you've ever had a problem with the plants in a container, you want to throw that mix out and start from scratch again. And probably even sterilize with some really hot water too when you wash the container out at the end of the season. That's the only reason I would not reuse mix. But the biggest thing I do, I try to reuse a lot of mix for the bottom, my old mix for the bottom parts of those bigger containers. And then I'll freshen up the top, like I said, 8 inches or so, because that's where most of the root activity is for most of the plants that we put in containers. So I'll always utilize new mix in the top layer, and I'll reuse my old mix in the bottom. And then after a few years, I'll just dump that mix into the garden and use it as an amendment somewhere. And that way I'll work it into the soil or use it as a mulch somewhere or work it into my compost pile. And either way it gets, that way it gets a lifetime of use.
Absolutely. I'm the same way, even so let's say I went out and bought a big flat of petunias, at Walmart. Even at the end of the season, I'll find myself like, when you're taking out your bedding plants, I'm like, that's good stuff. Like, shake it off. I want it all to be, I don't like to throw it away.
Grab every last bit for sure. Yeah. I do that. My wife and I are diametrically opposed on this. She likes to get those plants yanked out and thrown in the garbage. And I'm like, shake all that dirt off. It's valuable stuff. It's not dirt. It's potting mix.
Yeah.
But it's a great amendment for the garden too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the best thing to do is actually, just put the entire thing of an annual plant at the end of the season, put that with the root ball and all that potting mix into your compost pile and let the plant material die back. And then you get double benefit. You get the peat moss and sometimes perlite or whatever other amendments they put in the potting mix. Plus you get some plant material, putting some decomposed organic matter back into your compost pile.
See, this is why I like having a garden show. It's because I get to talk to people who are very like-minded to me. No, I love it. I'm going to make my husband listen to that little segment too, because that is the very same thing. He's completely opposite than I at that time of year when it's time to get everything out of the garden and get it away. But to me, it's like, no, that can be in the soil. That can go in the compost. This can, but gardeners like us, we like to conserve,
Right. And we're cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
We want our money to go as far as it can.
That's right. Reuse, recycle. Okay. We will be right back after this quick break with more from Brian Lloyd and Olson's Greenhouse right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, having so much fun today with Brian Lloyd from Olson's Greenhouse, and we're talking container plants. And Brian, let's get to the fun part.
Let's do it.
Flowers. And I think it was you that I heard at some point, probably either on another podcast or a radio show, and I think you said the fillers and the spillers, and I'm sure there was something else. And I loved that analogy. So talk us through how to design the perfect container garden.
Well, I can't claim credit for this. I first heard it from proven winners, and I'm not even sure if they coined the phrase, but the phrase is thrillers, fillers, and spillers. And it's a great guideline in order to decide how does each type of plant, what's the habit of each type of plant that we put in the container, and then how does the overall design look and work together? So it's really easy, and I'll say it again. Thrillers are a focal point, and they're designed to be usually taller, or for some reason, there's something to bring you into the container. From far away, you notice a thriller first because it's either bigger, taller, or has some attribute that makes it's the star of the show. Okay. So, and we usually put these in the center, but if you're putting your containers against a house or in a corner, sometimes I'll put these actually on one of the edges, and there'll be a backdrop for everything else. So that's the thriller. You want to start with your thriller and pick out at least one, sometimes two or three nice plants to be the focal point. And then I'll jump over to spillers. That's the third one. Spillers are they kind of soften up the edges of the container. They make they're trailing plants, things that will creep and trail over the edge. And they basically give that nice soft look to the container. And it's a transition between the hard container that you use and the soft plant material that you have above it. So spillers are anything creeping and trailing. And then fillers is kind of what fills in the rest all around. Fillers are mounding plants usually, and they're kind of the transition between your spiller and your thriller.
I love it. Okay, the other day I saw you on KSL Studio 5, and you had the most beautiful new varieties of, petunias. I mean, was it Hippie Chick? What is it called?
Yeah, Hippie Chick is an awesome purple petunia and white on the outside. It's a bicolor, but it's the shape of that purple that I've never seen before in flowers.
I haven't either. And I'm going to find a way to put a picture or a link to it in our episode notes or on social media because it was so amazing. And would that be considered? So that was a petunia, right? Was it was a petunia wave, like a trailing petunia, or? Well,
Wave is a brand name that I think is by a different breeder. I'm going to look up the breeder while we're talking of Hippie Chick, so I can give them credit because all these breeders are working on different colors and habits and things like that. And they love to claim credit for their own. So Wave is a spreading petunia, and it will do a little bit of mounding. Hippie Chick is similar. It will mound, and so it makes a great filler. And most fillers are fillers and spillers in one. They're mounding and trailing. They'll get big and fall over the edge and kind of make a nice ball of color that gets bigger than the container. So it's not a hard, fast rule that they're separate. A lot of times they're the same plant in one, and that's what Hippie Chick is. Basically, all petunias fall into two categories. There's basic petunias grown from seed, and most seed petunias are just the standard old petunias. Even though there's some new breeding that's done in them, they grow up and they spread about 8 inches, and that's it. And sometimes they grow up and fall apart and look ugly late in the summer. So those are seed petunias or basic petunias. And then there's vegetative petunias. These are started by cuttings instead of seeds, and they retain all the attributes that make them so much nicer. And that's mounding and spreading usually. So Hippie Chick is a vegetative petunia, as well as most of the proven winners are. And Waves are actually grown from seed, but they found a way to get most of those attributes to stick with the seed, which rarely happens. but those are all premium petunias rather than basic.
Okay, so that kind of petunia would be considered a thriller, or I mean let's see, a thriller and a
filler, a filler and a spiller, and you could call it a thriller too if you really love it. But it's not very upright growing. It doesn't get very tall, and so I would use it as a filler and a spiller.
Okay, got it. So, what are some of your favorite thrillers?
I love things that give movement. So, first of all, you can always use a grass, and a lot of people think of spike or green Dracaena, or cordyline is actually the botanical name, or most people call them spikes. But cordylines also come in reds, and I love reds. I use those all the time. So red sensation or red star cordyline, I'll use all the time as a thriller. The other one I love the most for grasses is purple fountain grass. Everybody knows it. It gets these beautiful tassels at the end when it goes to seed, and the color of the foliage is just awesome, and you can play off that color for everything. But I like to branch out and use flowers a lot too. So I'll use a salvia with a tall spike on it, or sometimes just an extra big dahlia that gets a lot of blooms on it. I'll use those types of things as thrillers as well.
Yeah, maybe snapdragons, depending on the size of container.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Really tall or that kind of a thing. Okay. So we got the thriller. What are some of your favorite spillers?
For spillers, there's one that it'll stand the test of time forever, and it's Lismachia, Creeping Jenny, and it comes in green and yellow varieties. This is grown just for foliage. Doesn't really get any blooms that you'll notice, but it's just it makes almost any container look awesome. So Creeping Jenny is what I love the most, but I also branch out and use another one or use other varieties. The biggest one that's been up and coming recently is this new sedum by Proven Winners, Lemon Coral, and it's this nice chartreuse green color that contrasts with everything, and it's like bulletproof. You can't kill it. It spreads nicely. It mounds as well a little bit, and it's got this beautiful texture. It looks sharp, but it's soft as can be to touch, and so that makes a great spiller. A lot of people use potato vine, Ipomea.
Yes.
And I use that a lot as well, but it's pretty aggressive, so you want to make sure you've got a big container and that you keep it in its spot. And then another big one that most people have loved for a long time is Bacopa. And Bacopa comes in mostly white, but you can get it in pinks and darker purples and blue as well. And the problem with Bacopa is it doesn't do great in hot summers that we have. And so it usually, if you miss a watering in the summer, it goes out of bloom. But they've been breeding Bacopa so that it'll last longer in the heat and for bigger flower size. So if you've used Bacopa in the past and didn't like it, it's worth trying again because there's new genetics that'll make it perform better for you this time.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I love it. All right. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what to put in containers. And of course, everybody has their own favorites and that kind of a thing. But let's quickly talk before we get into, I want to go over watering as well as fertilizing. But you and I are both admins of a Facebook group called Utah Gardeners. And we have a contest going on called ConCon. Why don't you tell everybody about that?
We do. We started ConCon last year because we've always done this container fest at Home Depot in April, and COVID put a stop to it for us. We couldn't get so many people together, which is unfortunate because it was an awesome event. So I turned to Facebook in the virtual world, and we let people do their containers on their own and submit pictures. And there's no better way than Facebook to submit pictures to a group of people and get all sorts of inspiration going on around the group. And so that's what we did. We have 4 weekly winners. We're right in the middle of our first week of ConCon for 2021 right now. And you can submit your pictures of your containers, whether they're mature or you just barely planted them. We get all sorts of submissions and show off what you've done, and you can win prizes. So it's an awesome thing to come together. And the ultimate prize at the end of the 4 weeks, we have 4 finalists, and we get them together and judge them. And this year we're having the staff at Olson's greenhouse do the judging of those 4 finalists. And the winner wins a $500 shopping spree of Olson's greenhouse plants, as well as a behind the scenes tour of our greenhouses that we talked about that were closed to the public. So a really exclusive event.
That is so awesome. I'm really excited about it. And if anything else, you got to go. And if you're not a member of Utah Gardeners Facebook group, go ask, because it is so fun to see. And it's inspiring to see all the different container plants, you know?
It is, yeah. And there's a lot of unique and cool stuff. And I've gotten ideas from the group. Yeah. Our winner last year put together a flower tower, which was a tower that was like 3 feet tall out of her pot. Her pot was already a couple feet tall. And she's got instructions in the group. You can look up how to build one of these flower towers for yourself. But basically, she put chicken wire in a tower shape and some fabric around the edge and plugged plants into the soil that held in. And it was blooming, and she's got a cool design, and it looks awesome.
And see, that's another thing about container gardening is it doesn't necessarily need to be the container you find at the store. You can be creative and make your own in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. I've seen people use all sorts of things for containers. I one year went on Studio 5 and used a dresser. I found a dresser at Hobby Lobby, just an old antique one. It was a cheap one. And I pulled out some of the drawers and put soil, put some plastic in to hold the water, put soil in. And it was the coolest container I've had in my yard ever. Everybody loved it. And it just had this vibe of, inside furniture meets, and it wasn't redneck or anything. It wasn't distasteful at all. It was just a cool, unique way to do a container. And my mother-in-law actually snagged that from me and took it to her house and displayed it all summer long. So you can use a lot of different things for containers as long as you got that drainage and you can hold soil volume. Let your mind go in weird places, and you'll find something that you might like to do year after year.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay. So we've only got a minute and a half left of this episode. I can't believe it. Time has just flown. So with watering container plants, really number one goal, don't ever let it dry out completely, correct? Yeah,
this is the biggest thing that I'm glad we're getting a chance to hit on. There's two things with taking care of your containers over time. So number one is watering. Actually, there's three things. Number one, watering. Number two is sun exposure. So you want to make sure you put the right plants in the right place, that if you've got full sun plants, they don't see shade all day long. So you got to pay attention to that. And then lastly is fertilizing. And watering and fertilizing go together because containers, because they're above ground, they need water more often than plants in the ground. And a lot of times in our summer, we've got to water containers twice a day. And so I always put them on a drip irrigation system on a timer. That way I never miss a watering and they look their best forever.
I love it. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Brian, listen. How do our listeners find you? We've got ogg.com, which is an amazing domain, by the way. And you can go there and find out where they can buy Olson's greenhouse plants, correct?
That's right. So ogg.com for Olson's Greenhouse Gardens. And we love to help gardeners. So we have a blog there. And you've got a link to our podcast as well, Dig in the Yard.
Yes, you can I'll put a link to that podcast in the episode notes of this show as well. And all the links where you can find Brian Lloyd and Olson's Greenhouse. Brian, this has been really fun. Thanks for inspiring our listeners today and giving us all the scoop on container gardens. This has been so much fun.
Thanks for having me, Jana. We'll see you soon.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. As always, let me know what you'd like to see on the show. You can message me on Instagram. Our handle is @GardeningUtah. Or if you hit up the episode notes on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can see links to a lot of things that we talked about today. And you can link over to our social media and check out our Instagram, our Facebook, and send us a message that way as well. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed to the show. And you know what? Give me a 5-star rating. I would love you for it. And if you give us a review and give us some love, we'll give it right back to you and read it on the show. Thanks again for listening. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. I'm Jana Francis. We'll see you next week here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlant.com that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plant is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlant.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlant.com today.